Welcome to the Mobility Innovators Podcast.
Hello everyone, I'm so happy to welcome all listeners from all over the world to Mobility Innovator Podcast. I'm your host, Jaspal Singh. Mobility Innovator Podcast invite key innovators in the transportation and logistic industry to share their thought about the key changes in the sector, about their work, and what is their forecast for the future. Today, I'll be talking to one very special guest. He has been spreading the knowledge about electric buses and electric taxis all over the world for the last 7 years. He represented the city of Shenzhen, a city of 20 million people, on various global platforms. Shenzhen is known as the capital of electric buses in the world, with more than 15,000 buses and 18,000 electric taxis. He was the Deputy General Manager of Shenzhen Bus Group, a company which is running 6,000 electric buses and 5,000 electric taxis. Man, this is huge, as total number of transit buses in whole Canada is just 10,000. I'm so happy to welcome Joseph Ma, or you can call him Joe. He's now the advisor to the CEO of Saudi Arabia Public Transport Company, SAPTCO, and looking to replicate his success in the city of Riyadh. It's now time to listen and learn.
Disclaimer: Mr. Joseph Ma participated in this podcast in his personal capacity. The views expressed are his own and do not necessarily represent the views of Shenzhen Bus Group or Saudi Arabia Public Transport Company.
Hello, Joe. Thank you so much for accepting our invite. We are so fortunate to have you as our next guest.
Hello, Jasper. Good morning. Good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum, where I come from, where I'm working now. Thank you for inviting me to come on the podcast. It's a real honor.
Oh, it's honor for us. So to have you. So today I'll be, spending time to learn more about you, your success in Shenzhen, about your new role and your perspective on future of electric mobility. And to start with, I would like you to share a little more about yourself to our listener and any interesting fact about your career, which is not on your LinkedIn.
Right. This is a good one. Just wow. What I haven't put on my LinkedIn is that I was never a studious type when I was a young boy. Very, very mischievous, and I used to skip school a lot. And this is like back in Hong Kong in the sort of like late 60s, early 70s. I used to skip school a lot, and I used to take public transport to all the sort of like the beaches, the go and play football. And I would go from Hong Kong, Kowloon, where I used to live, over to Hong Kong Island. And in those days you had to take public transport because being a young kid, I couldn't drive, and so I took buses, I took ferries, I took from Kowloon side to Hong Kong, and just to go to the beach and just skip school altogether. So that's how I got to know the public transport system in Hong Kong. And I became so passionate about public transport system. And, now even at my age, I still take public transport everywhere where I can. Yeah. So that's not in my LinkedIn, but later on I became, a bit more responsible. When you grow up, you become boring, you become more responsible. I started to work a bit harder. So yeah, that's not in my LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's true. Like nobody will put skipping school on their LinkedIn. But like I love what you said. When you become more mature, we became more boring, and we start doing uninteresting stuff. But I think you are still doing a lot of interesting stuff. So you're not boring. So you did your bachelor and master in urban design and city planning from UK, and
Yes.
After you had a successful career as a planner and consultant, why you transitioned to electric mobility sector in Shenzhen? I'm very surprised to see that move.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're right. I studied urban planning, I studied urban design, in the UK. And then when I've also worked in different places. I've worked in London, Hong Kong, China, and now here I am in Saudi Arabia. And as an urban planner, I love traveling to different places, and I love to work on planning and design of new towns and cities. And in the late 60s and late 80s and the 90s, I was back in Hong Kong. I was doing all the airport core projects. I was getting involved with the building of the new airport in the new international airport. many new towns. And I always start with, when I do urban planning, when I start with a plan, it's like you're starting from scratch, like a blank canvas. And what do you do? I mean, I always start with the circulation system. I wouldn't call it the road system, the circulation system, how people move around, how public transport move around, where and in particular in Hong Kong, they take public transport very seriously. And they always there's a saying, they use public transport, particularly metro system, as a backbone for the city, for movement in the city. So I always started with like laying out all the circulations, where the MTR would go, the metro system would go, the road system linking into the metro system, and then how people will circulate once you get out of the metro station. So I became very passionate about mobility. So it's not really public transportation, it's more mobility, but it so happens that later on I got involved with more and more kind of metro system, the sort of like route alignment studies, TOD developments. So I got more and more sort of skewing away from the sort of the more mainstream urban design, urban planning, more into the sort of like the mobility as a subject. So that's how I started, and I did projects did many exciting projects in China, working for the MTR. I did projects in Hong Kong. I did projects in Shanghai, Wuhan, and a few other places. And I gradually got into sort of like public transport and became a kind of so-called expert in public transport. And later on, I joined Sun Hung Kai, which is like the majority shareholder of KMB, and I got involved with buses. And in 2015, I was sent over to work in Shenzhen by KMB, who's the majority shareholder of one of the majority shareholders of Shenzhen Bus. And hence, I was lucky to be in Shenzhen at the right time in the right place when they were just starting with the electric mobility. So yeah, that's. And here I am today. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Such a long and interesting journey, I would say. And it's also, people say that it's like a soul searching for the right place. So you find your right place with public transit. We are so lucky to have you working on such an exciting project. So you did amazing work in Shenzhen, like you mentioned. You joined there in 2015, did amazing work, were quite settled in your current assignment and all. I'm very curious to know, why did you move to Riyadh suddenly from a place of public transport to the place of car? Like, why did you move to Riyadh?
Well, again, I think it goes back to the question, what I talk about, blank canvas. We all know about Saudi as being very, very car-driven kind of country. People like to drive the cars and stuff like that. And I think there is a lot of opportunity for public transport development in not just in Saudi Arabia, but in the whole of the MENA region, as we've seen in recent years. So there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the MENA region. And with sort of like the reliance on in the old days, I mean, the traditional kind of economy is based on as very much an oil-based economy, sort of fossil fuel and that. And I see that will come, there'll be major change in the coming maybe a decade or two, because like, the COP26, everybody's committed to sort of like the climate change, the reducing the sort of global warming. And a lot of the MENA countries have actually made commitments to COP26, helping to reduce, global warming, the effect of global warming. And Saudi itself, they've promised by 2030 that in Riyadh, there'll be 30% of the vehicles on the street will be electric vehicles. And that goes along with, that the best thing to do is to change the public transport system, the buses. And so I see, like the whole of MENA region, including Saudi, that there is a thrust towards, promoting public transportation, as you can see in other cities around in the MENA region. So that's why I'm here, and I thought I've done, well, in a way I've done all I could in Shenzhen, and I like to, meet the next challenges, which is where I am today, really. Yeah.
That's great. No, I really love start with the blank canvas and build something from the scratch. And yeah, you did a great job earlier, and I'm very confident that Riyadh will achieve its target by 2030, which is good for the whole world. Now, I want to ask something about the city where you were working earlier. So, you always describe Shenzhen as the lab mice of electric buses, having taken its first 100 buses back in 2010 and converting the entire fleet by 2017 in total 16,000 electric buses and 22,000 electric taxi, such a huge number. And Shenzhen was successful to electrify its entire fleet well before its deadline. I think the deadline was 2020, but they did it 3 years prior in 2017. There must be many learning lesson in the background. What would you do differently if you get an opportunity to start again? I don't know whether you may want to start again or do it again or not.
Well, I think, yeah, as I said earlier, I was lucky to be in Shenzhen at the right time, at the right time in the right place. In sort of 2015, I joined Shenzhen Bus, and that was a time when government wanted to. I mean, both central government and Shenzhen municipal government wanted to push for electrification. And you're right, they set a target. Actually, the target was 2018 for us to do all the buses, and 2020 to do all the taxis, something like that. But we finished electrifying all the buses by 2017 and the taxis by 2018. And I mean, we Shenzhen Bus, I always say that we're the lap mice, but hey, the lap mice turn out okay. And then and the joke goes in Shenzhen that if Shenzhen Bus had bought into a company like BYD, say in 2010, it wouldn't just be a public transport company anymore. Yeah. It will be, one of the richest companies in the world. But you could never have foresight. And having foresight is boring anyway. So so there was a lot of trial and error, and then we worked very closely with Shenzhen Bus worked very closely with BYD, and we actually gave them a lot of feedback about how to improve the technologies, because on a day-to-day basis we're actually driving on the road. Driving on the streets, like taking on passengers. So a lot of mistakes were learned, a lot of experience were learned, sort of like that. But looking back, I wouldn't say I would change everything. If you ask me, I would say, having foresight is boring. So like it's always the world should be about learning from your mistakes. And if you know everything in advance, that life would be too boring. But having said that, if I was to say go back and do it again, I would the two main takeaway I would suggest would be, first of all, don't go for hybrid, because at the early stage we went for hybrid, or rather Shenzhen Bus went for hybrid, and then you ended up with two systems in the depot, and it's like and most of the time you would be driving with diesel anyway, because the electric part is just very rarely used. So I would say that, don't go for hybrid. And then to begin with, you start with maybe a small depot or maybe one or two routes, but have 100% electric buses on that particular route or that particular depot, because there's a lot of data to be collected. There's a lot of experience to be gained from running an electric fleet. And you want to be able to compare the difference between running a diesel fleet, an entirely 100% diesel fleet, and running a 100% electric fleet. Then you can compare the differences. You can collect a lot of data. Whereas if you have a mixed fleet, it makes the comparison a lot more kind of meaningless, if you like. Yeah.
Well, that's
so
interesting.
If you ask me, looking back, would I do anything different? I probably wouldn't do anything different, because I wouldn't have the foresight to do that. If I was to do anything, then those were the two things I would suggest.
That's great. No, I love your quote about foresight is boring. If the future is so predictable, there is no fun. So it should be, there should be a factor of uncertainty.
Absolutely.
So, you gave some good point about not inducting hybrid buses and then going full-fledged on one route or one depot. So just following up question would be, many cities are just started to induct electric buses, and many of them are still in a planning phase. So what advice you would give to these cities? Like, what is the best process for inducting large fleet of electric buses? Like, okay, you can do 5, 10, but what should be the process to induct large fleet of buses? What should they follow?
Well, I think there is a saying that horses for courses. there's no one solution that fits all. No, and then I mean the Shenzhen experience is very different to maybe very different to others, because like we in Shenzhen we adopted for depot charging, because as you know, the daytime electricity price is 5 times that of the nighttime. So it was essential for Shenzhen bus to opt for the nighttime charging, depot charging. And so electricity price is something that you have to take into consideration, the differentiation between daytime cost and the nighttime cost. And the actual operation itself, you know, whether you're running long distance services or you're running circular routes, or running sort of like a shuttle routes, first and last mile services. So you need to take in all different consideration. There isn't a one size fit all kind of solution. And I would say the most important thing is another important factor you have to take into consideration would be the charging infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure you have in the city? I mean, people can go for depot charging. There's like opportunity charging. There's like you know, different ways of charging trolley buses. So again, look at the operation itself and what kind of characteristics are required, and your services. That's the most important thing. So, and the other thing would be choosing the right size of vehicle. You don't want different sizes of vehicles. You don't like, you know, because all your depots, because it's not like a petrol scenario. It's not like a diesel scenario where you can just go anywhere, go into any filling station. You know, they can fill in fill a big bus or a small bus. Whereas if we're going for depot charging, you need to look at your depot configuration. Look at all the parking spaces. Look at the size of the parking spaces, the maneuvering of the buses, whether for instance, you want first bus in, last bus out kind of concept. The first bus to come in, go right to the back, get charged, and then in the morning it's the last bus to leave. Can be the last bus to leave the depot. Or you know, there are a number of combinations. Some buses only need a top up. Some buses need a longer charge. So these are all the factors you have to take into consideration when you're thinking about your operation. So it's not just about buying the buses. You've got to buy the right bus. You got to make sure that the interchangeability of different routes. You don't want sort of like one bus to different standards. So one particular bus cannot be charged in a different depot. So these are all the things that I would say that are important to consider.
No, these are great point. I agree with you. First is the charging infrastructure. Second is the right size of the bus and planning your route well and the operation well. A lot of cities are trying to bring buses without changing anything else in the operation, which is not a good recipe. They have to think from the operation side rather than from the vehicle side. So these are great points. Thanks for sharing. And I also want to ask you, how do you see technology really help the Shenzhen Bus Group to manage and operate such a large fleet of electric buses? You had a big control center with 30 feet video wall. It was so impressive to see that. Do you think it's imperative to have good technology infrastructure? And what key technology the city must have before inducting the buses? Because many of the cities are, I can give example of some of the Indian city which are jumping from diesel to electric, but they don't have the good infrastructure, technology infrastructure. So what do you think the technology infrastructure play a role in the operation of electric buses?
Well, the good thing about if you're converting your fleet in a wholesale manner, in a large scale manner, the good thing about it is you buying a batch of new buses where there should be the latest technologies, the latest kind of fitting all the design and everything. And you do need to collect a lot of data. I mean, nowadays, we're running a public transport company operation. It's not just about running services. It's about, you really need to adopt the latest technology to help you run the operation. There's a lot of technologies, for instance, within a lot of telematics in an electric bus. A lot of information data that you need to look out for. For instance, the most essential, I would say, the state of charge for each vehicle. You want to make sure that your vehicle has enough charge, and whenever there's is running short of electricity, where should that bus couldn't get charged? So a lot of information is required for the data, And the thing is, like nowadays, all vehicles, not just electric buses, are fitted with a lot of data, computer, information. So having a strong kind of monitoring system, not just for the vehicles, but for it's for the whole operation, for the maintenance of the vehicles, for the safety of the vehicles, for the driving habits. Because with electric buses, it's really about depends on quite importantly, it also depends on how the driver drives it. Because some driver they drive it hard and that saves electricity. So having that kind of information, having access to every single vehicle is, in my view, is quite essential. And that's why, and on top of that, we've got all the other safety issues, like watching the safety of the road system, congestion, the anti-collision, everything is so important nowadays in running an operation. So I would say, if you're able to do a wholesale kind of like transition from diesel to electric, you must well invest that little bit more on the operating system, on the back of house system, where you can get a lot of data, doing predictive maintenance, doing it's a lot of things that you get that actually saves a lot of management time. That when Shenzhen Bus installed that screen that you talked about, we were holding sort of like a weekly meeting with all the bus teams. So, and they didn't need to come to the office, or whereas before they would have to come to the office. And then with that system, we're able to access to talk directly to them on a weekly basis, or even on a daily basis. We can monitor the whole operation, and then you can see look out for congestion on particular part of the city during particular time. So in my view, that's really worth investing into.
I agree with you. With the data now you can collect with the electric buses, if you're not using it, you can't run your operation. Like you mentioned about state of charge, the driver behavior. In fact, one of the study by BYD state that the driver behavior can impact up to 30% of the charging, the range of the bus, which is great. No, I fully agree with you that. And also I want to know, because Shenzhen is often referred as also the Silicon Valley of hardware. It's a city which has done amazing progress in last couple of decades. And it's become one of the powerful and innovative ecosystem. Shenzhen Bus Group was also working with some good startup. How do you think those partnership help the company? How do you think the startup play an important role in today's world?
Well, Shenzhen is really a miracle in my view. Like when I was a kid, my father used to take me to the border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen, and you looked over to Shenzhen. In those days, I'm not talking about that long ago. Maybe this is in the early 70s. They were.
Yeah, you're not that old. So.
Well, the CBD now of Shenzhen used to be just like 30 years ago, maybe. Just all party fields. I mean, Shenzhen only has a history of 40 years. And like 40 years ago, you're talking about a population of 30,000, no more than that, or slightly more than that, maybe. Now the population of 20 million is a mega city. God knows how many MTR or metro routes they have now. I mean, when I first went to the city, went to work in the city, like this is like doing work in the city, 15 years ago, maybe 15. There was only one metro line, but now there are like 10, 20, like coming up to not 20, 10 or 15, something like that. And they're building by the end of next year, or the year after, there is like talking about 1,000 kilometers of metro lines. So it's a very vibrant city, and it's also a very young city. The average, the average age of Shenzhen is 37 years old. I'm well way beyond that, and so it's always been a very dynamic city. And I think 40 years ago, when they decided that Shenzhen was going to be the first special economic zone, and with its location being so just next to Hong Kong, it attracted a lot of entrepreneur into the city, setting up kind of like a R&D research basis. So nowadays you've got a major global company, like you've got Huawei, you got Tencent, you got TGI, you've got
Yeah.
BYD, and Shenzhen Bus is always, because Shenzhen Bus is actually as old as the city itself, and it grew up with all those companies, and a lot of those companies actually work hand in hand with Shenzhen Bus, and they grew up together. Like for example, the case of BYD. I would say if it wasn't for Shenzhen Bus, BYD may not be as well known, as well established as today. So very important that working with all these new, the startups and the new companies, and that is kind of the spirit of the city as well. It's very innovative. It's very kind of like progressive. Always looking for the next new thing, because there's so many young people.
Oh, that's great. That's great. No, you already mentioned about BYD in 2010. If Shenzhen Bus have just acquired some stake, it will be one of the wealthiest organization.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I agree. The city has grown with the startup and it become a powerhouse now. Yeah. Now I want to touch on the other side of electrification. You already mentioned some of these things earlier. So just want to go a little more in details. You mentioned about the energy procurement and management. And I feel that energy procurement management play a very critical role in minimizing the energy cost of these electric vehicles. And you already mentioned in Shenzhen, you got a very good rate. Like in the night time, the electricity charge was 1/5 of the daytime. This is a reason Shenzhen Bus went for depot charging. What are the other software and data analytics tool you were using to manage the charging infrastructure and energy costs? It will be useful for the cities which are planning to induct electric buses, because many of the cities are not considering the energy cost right now because they feel it's so cheap, we should not worry about. But I think it will be a major cost for electric buses in the future. So what kind of infrastructure you build at Shenzhen Bus to manage these costs?
Well, in the early days, it's pretty much down to the sort of like what do you call it, the managers of each what do you call them, the depot manager, the fleet managers, who would assess the bus routes and then their requirement, and then which ones should come in to do the charges at what time, and then that used to be done very much manually, looking at based on the experience of each the fleet manager, how to do that, whether should allocate the buses to come back. Try to avoid coming back at peak hours to do the charging, and to come, at least go for the sort of like the medium price period if there was a need for top up. So in the early days, much of that work would be done pretty much manually. What I mean by manually is like they would do it with spreadsheets and whatever. But nowadays there isn't. We rely very much on the charging service providers as well. Because like Shenzhen, as I mentioned before, a lot of in the early days, a lot of the charging were subcontract out to the charging service providers. So within the chargers, they have smart charging. How much it should top up, and how much it should like at what level they should cut off the electricity. So that would be fed in manually to each charger. But now, as I understand, they are looking at some software with a company looking at charging efficiency, looking at how they can get the best kind of what do you call it, the best the optimal mileage out of the charge and out of the bus, and they are looking into that. So I believe that something will be coming out very soon on this one. Yeah, they're looking at studies at that. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Yeah. It's so funny the way technology has changed. Now even we consider Excel and spreadsheet manually. Yeah. There was a time when we say, oh, we are using Excel and it's computerized, and now we say Excel is manual. And I agree with that.
I'm still struggling with Excel.
Just follow up to the previous question. Another innovative model in Shenzhen, which I is always very big fan of, is outsource all charging infrastructure to third party and pay them on per kilometer basis. What are the key advantages and disadvantages of this model?
Well, in the early days, I think when battery technologies were still very much an unknown for a lot of people certainly for an operator like Shenzhen Bus, it was essential. I mean, the bus itself is easy. The bus body, well, that's easy. The doors, the sort of like all the other stuff, the air conditioning, that's easy enough. Whereas batteries was very much a new thing, a new technology that came into the market. And so what Shenzhen Bus decided to do in the early days was to separate the batteries and the charging to a separate service provider, a more professional kind of service provider. So in the early days, in the first batch of buses in the early 2010s, the Shenzhen Bus would purchase a bus body, and then the batteries and the battery monitoring system and the charging service will be done by a separate company. So and until 2015, then they started to say, okay, they would go for the whole bus, buy the whole bus, because by that time they learned they had a lot more knowledge about the batteries itself, and the technical staff were able to sort of handle a lot of that mechanical, electro, not so much mechanical now, more electronic stuff.
Yeah.
But recently in 2020, actually, Shenzhen Bus had set up their own infrastructure, charging infrastructure company, investment company, looking at investing into the infrastructure, charging infrastructure, looking at providing servicing for electric vehicles. So that in a way, because they actually accumulated 10 years of experience, that they felt that they were able to handle the whole thing by themselves. The bus and the charging, the batteries, the maintenance of electric vehicles. So yeah, I mean, it's the reason why they did it in the early days, because the batteries was an unknown to them.
No, it's a complete transition now, and more expertise you get in-house, and there is a scope to grow.
That's right.
Yeah, that's great. I'm very curious to know about the next point, which I want to discuss with you, is about the manpower and the human resource. The transition to electrification is actually a process. It's not a one step, and it's require a lot of organizational transformation approach, change management, including staff relocation, reskilling, route planning, infrastructure upgrading. So there are a lot of process and steps involved. And I remember that Shenzhen Bus did not retrench any staff. And in fact, they reskill around 619 employees to become electromechanical technician, if I'm right. Yeah. How important you think is staff reskilling, and what mistake the other transit agencies do?
Well, I mentioned earlier that Shenzhen Bus is a joint venture between the Shenzhen municipal government and KMB from Hong Kong, Kuala Bus from Hong Kong. And it's a partly state-run organization. It's kind of like partly state-owned organization. The social responsibility, the social commitment was always on the top of the list of priorities that the company had to look for. And so retrenching staff is, retraining staff is one of the very important to keep the staff, the sort of like keep the morale going. So it made a very conscious decision that it didn't, throughout the whole transition process, it wasn't going to lay off any staff. And therefore a lot of staff were being retrained and look for like, as you said, like looking for maintenance. I mean, even this happened even before that, because in the old days we used to have conductor and conductress selling tickets on the bus. And then when sort of the smart payment came along, like a lot of the conductors and conductors were being retrained to become drivers. So it always had a tradition of not laying off staff, trying not to lay off staff anyway. And so really the retraining of staff, looking after the welfare, was always going to be the top of the list of priorities. That's why we had Shenzhen Bus had a really kind of like good morale within the staff force. And I mean, for company, I mean, it may be, hey, because people say that, because your operation is subsidized, so it's okay for you to do that. So I can understand from other companies and operators, particularly the commercially run operators, this may not be easy. But having said that, I think in running a public transport company, when running any company, you need to think beyond, outside the box. You need to look at new business ventures. I mean, you've got good staff. You should always, you can always retrain them to do something else. Maybe, having said that, maybe not so much a professional staff, because they spend a long time going through the whole education loop, and they don't want to do something, say for example from a doctor to become an engineer. That's difficult. But even for ourselves, we come from general background. Even you're talking about, I came from a background of being an urban planner, urban designer, and I went to sort of public transportation, because there's a lot of skills that can be applied to other industries. I mean, having said that, as I said, if you're a doctor or a surgeon, you can't turn from a surgeon to become a lawyer. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of common skills that can be applied. And the thing is how do you retrain the people, how you sort of motivate people. That's what I think is important.
That I fully agree with you. There are new business model emerging within the public transport organization, and organization can use these as an opportunity to reskill and retain their staff, and actually happy employees lead to happy customer, not other way around. So that's important. And on the funny side, I would never want to go to a doctor who was lawyer earlier and turn into a doctor.
That's a tough combination. That's a tough combination.
Yeah, that's a tough combination. Now, I want to come back to your earlier point. Foresight is boring, but I want to ask you a future question: electric or fuel cell? Which technology will win the race? Last year, I remember you mentioned that hydrogen fuel cell is expensive and will take 5 to 10 years to fully commercialize. Do you still believe that, or you are now more bullish about hydrogen fuel cell vehicle?
I think recently there's been a lot of talk about hydrogen, right? But in general, it's still very much more expensive compared to electric. And now that electric has come leaps and bounds in the last 5 years, technologies become cheaper. The batteries are becoming cheaper. The technologies are becoming better. The range of the buses are going further and further. So I still think that I still hold the view of hydrogen will be another 5 to 10 years. I mean, really good that we're looking into hydrogen. I'm not trying to knock it, but it's still a lot more expensive than battery electric. And like recently, I read in the article, the city in Montpellier, they were supposed to get something like 50 vehicles for between 2023 and 2025, and then they did the economics and thought, the calculation, and thought that was too expensive, and they ditched the idea. So I think the cost is still very much an issue that I would say that it's holding back the development of hydrogen. But having said that, I mean, again, if you got government willing to pay for the subsidies, then that's a different that can be a completely different calculation. Yeah,
I agree. No, I also read about that news that city is moving now from hybrid back to electric because they feel it doesn't make any economic sense to do that. And now I want to come back to your earlier point about why you moved to Riyadh. You left such a big impression with your work in Shenzhen. I think it'll be very difficult for people to realize that you are not anymore working with Shenzhen. So now let me ask you about your new role. Many people may not know that Riyadh is making huge investment in public transit, both metro and buses. You already mentioned that. SAPTCO, which is the company you're now working, is managing buses, metro, intercity, school transport in the country. And SAPTCO is also investing digital services like autonomous vehicle, on-demand mobility, journey planner, and all.
Yeah.
Did the CEO already give you a long list of tasks to complete and finish? What's your goal in the Riyadh?
Well, I think first of all, I think you're overrating me a bit. Just about, I don't think there's anybody that cannot be replaced. I mean, as I said, I was lucky to be in Shenzhen at the right time in the right place, and had a great team of people working with me. And I missed them very much. And I really had a good time working in Shenzhen. Enjoyed the time very much. But it's not just down to me; it's down to the whole everybody behind me. as for what's happening in Saudi Arabia, I think it's a very exciting place. I mean, as I said at the beginning, the whole of MENA region, next 10, 20 years, there's a lot of exciting things happening. Because the need to wean itself off, of dependence on the oil industry. So there are many exciting projects, some of which you've already named, like the electrification, metro system, autonomous driving, smart mobility, BRT, light rail, everything. So a lot of new things happening. I'm actually, I'm sure I've got a long list for myself. I don't know what the CEO expects from me, but I hope he thinks I will be helpful. I think, I mean, I'm really quite happy to be hopefully at the right place, right time again. And so repeat that excellent time that I had in Shenzhen. And as I said, there's a lot of exciting things happening here, and MENA is going to be a region that everybody will be looking at very importantly.
Yeah, I agree. MENA and Africa, whole these
Absolutely,
two continents are growing very fast and implementing new public transport infrastructure projects and all. And also, it's interesting is that Riyadh is also emerging as a startup destination in MENA region. A lot of new startups are coming from Riyadh now. How do you see the startup will play an important role in the transformation of transit system in Riyadh? What kind of support they can provide?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, MENA region is like you got so many different startups from different sectors, whether in lifestyle, food, fashion, shopping, everything, mobility. Mobility is just one of them, and a lot of new entrepreneurs coming into the city, investing into all these new startups. And I think, I mean, comparing that with Shenzhen again, Shenzhen, a very young city, very forward-looking, and a lot of people I met, a lot of the really successful people I met in Shenzhen were in the mid 30s, early 40s, or something like that. And it's wonderful to see young people coming in with fresh new ideas, raring to go and contributing to all different sectors. And I think public transportation again is mobility. I call it mobility. I wouldn't call it just public transportation. Yeah. It's such an important sector, and it's good to see. And I really admire young people wanting to be taking part in all these new startups. I mean, there's a Chinese saying that all the four most important elements in your life, you've got the clothes on your back, and the roof over your head, food on the table, and the last one, and one of the most important ones is mobility, able to move around. So mobility, startup, I think they should go hand in hand, and the more young people getting in the industry, getting involved, giving their ideas. And then I think nowadays, certainly in a lot of cities and a lot of countries, young people, they don't like their own cars anymore. They want to use public transportation. They want to share mobility. I think that the share economy, I mean, for the last few years, we've been affected by COVID. So the share economy kind of being affected quite significantly. But in the longer term, I think we're looking at sort of like the whole being sustainable. The share economy is still very much important, and share economy is, like it's always related to new startups. Like how do you share using smart system. Yeah. I think all that is really relying on young people coming into different sectors of the industries, different industries and different sectors. So yeah, I mean, I think this startups is a great thing. I mean, I've been involved with one or two of your startup kind of events. I think I'm always very supportive of new startups, and I think it's important to encourage that.
Yeah, no, you rightly mentioned bringing the fresh perspective, and these young people can always bring the new idea on the table, which sometimes we miss it. So we are kind of at the end of our this I would say talk. I'm very curious to know your background picture. Are you in a theater? Are you in a bus? What does it look like? What is it all about?
This is actually a bus. The background is actually a bus. This is one of the buses. One of the cases we did in Shenzhen bus. This is a joint collaboration with Lang Lang, the very famous pianist, the world-renowned pianist. And this is an electric bus, a double-decker electric bus. And Shenzhen Bus turned that into a music bus. This is actually where I'm sitting now. Behind this should be a piano, like on the top deck of the bus. And then Nalam would come on the bus and do kind of like musical tours, and then also encourage young people to come on the bus, take public transportation, take sightseeing, and learn about music at the same time. So this was actually very successful in Shenzhen, and I think public transportation need not be boring, need not be full of old fuddy-duddies like myself. Young and dynamic. It should be fun. It should be part of the whole your lifestyle, kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, this is the reason for. I really like this background, so I use it quite a lot. Yeah.
No, I love it. The seats look so remarkable, and actually, it's a new phrase of mass music as a service. So you are actually providing music while on the move. No, that's great. So now, now the fun part of our talk. Now it's a rapid fire question round, and I'll ask you 5 questions, and you need to answer it quickly. Just say whatever comes to your mind, and quick answer. Okay. So if you're ready, then I'll fire my first question to you.
Yeah, sure.
Great. So first question, if you were not in mobility sector, what other profession you would have selected?
Well, I always liked football, but I'm too small. Big enough.
Big enough. I love that, because Muhammad, last time he was on the podcast, and he also a big fan of football. So you can form a team with him. And now, you are a global trotter yourself. You traveled so much around the world. In fact, you work in different continents. So which is your favorite city in the world?
Hong Kong, London.
There is some bias about Hong Kong, but I accept it because I love Hong Kong too. I love Hong Kong too.
I know the public transport system inside out.
By skipping the school. So third question is, and I don't know, can you answer it without any bias, is which city has the best transit network in the world?
Again, Hong Kong and London. And maybe in the future, Riyadh. Maybe in the future
is Riyadh. I take it. Riyadh is... And again, one question, which is a difficult one for you to find out. Who's your favorite leader in the mobility sector?
The leaders, in my view, are the frontline staff. I think they're the most important people. They're leading the industry. I remember a time when I was, one time I was in Manchester, I was taking a bus. It was a Christmas day. And the driver was getting everybody to sing Christmas song. And I thought that was so wonderful. I mean, here we are on the Christmas day, everybody's having their day off, and he was driving a bus. I mean, that's, to me, is a hero. And he was still very happy, and everybody's like, everybody got on the bus and, oh, let's sing this and sing that. And he was singing Christmas song all the way through. So in my view, I always put the frontline staff as the leaders for the industry.
That's great. That's a really, really great answer. I mean, I never thought about it. And I fully agree. They are the one, even during this pandemic, they were the one who were putting their life and driving the bus all around. And they were helping the other frontline staff. A lot of nurses, doctors were using the public transit.
Absolutely. Talking about that, right? The pandemic, one of my colleagues at Shenzhen Bus, and every day he was, for the last 2 years, every day he was shuttling people from the border between Hong Kong and Shenzhen to the quarantine place. And 7 days a week, 24/7, and then because he was working in the so-called kind of like sensitive, because carrying people from the border to the quarantine place, so he couldn't go home. He hadn't been home for 2 years.
2 years.
He needed to be on shift. He needed to get to work, and then he couldn't just take self-isolation. So he's not been home for 2 years. He's been staying at the staff quarter, and every morning he would go from the staff quarter to the border, pick up staff, pick up passengers, dropping them off to the quarantine place, and then he would have a rest. And then weekend he couldn't go home on the weekend because he needed to for self-isolation. So to me, I mean, the frontline staff, they actually they are the backbone to the industry, in my view, and they should be, I see them as the leader of the industry.
No, that's great. That's such a remarkable story. Really, really heads off to these people, putting their life at risk. Now, last question. If you can change one thing in life, what would it be?
I wouldn't change a thing.
You
I'm
change
what I
thing.
am. I make mistakes. I mean, I wouldn't change a thing. No.
That's great. And I love that answer because some people try to look back and try to feel like, oh, I should change this and I should change that, but they forget that this is the foundation where they are today. So changing thing will not make future anything different. So it's
No.
just always look forward. Well, that's great. No, thank you so much, Joe, for your great insight. I really enjoyed this chat and I really loved your answers and giving perspective, your knowledge. I learned a lot from your experience as always, and I hope people who listen to this podcast, they will learn a lot. So thank you so much, and I wish you all the success in your new assignment.
Thank you, Jaswal. It's been really enjoyable and a real honor for me to share my bit of experience with you.
Thank you so much. Wish you good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. We'll be inviting some other inspiring guests in coming weeks. You can subscribe us online to get the notification. If you have any feedback or suggestion for this podcast, please do write to us at info@mobility-innovators.com. We look forward to see you next time. Thank you.